then hopefully Claire and David are going to be yes, they're on their way. And they're talking about Reiki, or Reiki, I'm not even sure how to pronounce it, so I'm looking forward to learning about that. When we first sort of was organising this event, and I was talking to my husband, he said, have you got anybody there talking about Reiki? Because there's somebody at work really into that, and I don't really know much about it. And I sort of thought, no, I don't really know much about it either. And then literally the next day, Claire was recommended to me, so I thought, well, that's just a perfect opportunity to learn about it, and hopefully they'll teach me how to pronounce it as well. So yeah, also Claire and David are probably not going to be here into the break time, so make the most of asking them any questions while they're here. Okay, and then after that, Joules is coming up, and she's talking about like hypnotherapy and reprogramming things. So I've known Joules for quite a long time, and I know she's a very interesting person. She knows lots of different things about different subjects, so I'm just happy to have her here talking about anything. Then we're going to have a break time. There's tea and coffee and refreshments. There's also like a piece of paper out there if people could write down any sort of good resources that they found along their sort of time, things that are good and interesting. Because I often find when you're looking into a new area and you don't know much about it, and you might do a Google search or something, what you come up with can often be really just the sort of fine veneer of the subject, and can sometimes be a bit lacklustre. And it can take a while of being interested in the subject before you find that really good book or that really good speaker about it. So today, it's about learning things, but also sharing any shortcuts that we found to really good information. So yeah, in the break time, people could write things down there that they found that were really useful or inspiring, that really hit the nail on the head. So it could be a book that you've read, or a YouTube channel, or a podcast, or a good documentary or presentation that you've seen. And people can write that down, and then at the end, people can like take a picture of it with their phones and look some of those things up in their own time. Okay, and then when we come back, Liz is going to be speaking about her experiences and Sasquatch and visions, and it's very, very exciting. So I've known Liz for quite a long time as well, although not as closely, because we sort of met through our kids. But I've seen her posting things about, her sort of experiences, and it's just so interesting and mind-expanding. So yeah, the opportunity to have her here actually speaking about it is really brilliant. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then Sonia's coming up, and she's talking about what is really happening and flourishing in this environment. That's very exciting. I've spoken to Sonia a bit, and she's a very interesting person, got lots of different areas of interest, so that's really exciting. After that, there's going to be more time for people to have a talk to people, and maybe get another cup of tea and a slice of cake, and then we've got till about 3:30 before I need to start packing up and going. Okay, so that is the sort of order of the day. Oh, I should also say, obviously I'm hoping everybody is coming to today with an open mind and a sort of positive outlook. And if you feel that something's not for you, that's fine, just let it go by. And obviously everybody's speaking from their own personal opinion, so what I'm saying might not be necessarily what other people here feel and think. That's fine, we're just here to talk about things and share ideas. Right, so my spiritual journey. So my name's Lydia Smith, I live in Stevenage, and as well as being a full-time mum, I also write creatively. That's my outlet, and there's some of my books here if anybody wants to have a look at them and find out a bit more about what I do. And I am interested in my spiritual journey. I think we're all on a spiritual journey all our lives. However much people want to acknowledge that or interact with it and work with it, we are on that journey. And our society is quite sort of, material, physical oriented. It's not necessarily very accepting of the other side of things that we don't always understand. So for me, it's about these really the big questions about what is going on here, where do we come from, where do we go when we die, what is this life for, how should we be living. That's why Sonia's talk sounds really, really exciting. And if you look to what sort of where society tells you to look, science and things like that, they don't have answers for these things. You're not supposed to really think about them too much. Or if they do have answers, they can often be quite sort of unconvincing, uninspiring, and in the case of some of them, like what happens when you die, just really bloody terrifying. And the other sort of outlet that you're given with society is church. So I went to church. I went with family originally, and I've been on my own to a few different churches, and I just don't feel very at home there. I don't mind the church buildings themselves, but the whole sort of rigmarole of it and the religious side of it, I've often found to be quite an ungodly place. And I am going to use the G word. I know that has quite a bad rep nowadays. And that's something I want to talk about as well, is the way that words get sort of symbolism and mythology built around them. And that can sometimes be used to sort of steer people in a direction or repel people from a direction. So you see that with God and spirituality. And I remember when I was having children and I wanted to have a natural birth, I was sort of put in this box of Earth Mother, hippie, doesn't really know what she's talking about, a bit unrealistic. And I've seen it over the last couple of years, if you question anything about the official narrative, well, you know what you get labelled as. And it works the other way as well, in what we think of as propaganda and advertising. I mean, if you just take a product like Coca-Cola, which, no offence to anybody, but the actual product is absolute filth, really. But because of the symbolism that's put around it and the mythology, we all feel cool picking up a bottle of Coke off the shelf. So it's really important to be aware of how words have these attachments put on them. And so I know that God doesn't have the best reputation, although I should point out that my interpretation of God is not society's box or even religion's box that it's put in. And I have tried other names like universe or spirit or all that is. I don't mind the divine, though that's quite godly in itself. But I always come back to the word God. I think for me personally, I think back to when I was young and growing up, before I'd even really thought about what that word means. If I was really desperate or in trouble or really upset, I'd just think, please God, help me. And it's that deep, guttural connection and reaching out for something that I come back to, and why I think it's a worthy word that I use. So unfortunately I didn't find much of that in church. I am going to keep looking. I know there's obviously different churches. I'm going to try the Quakers next. They're my next target. But also the other thing with religion is you have a lot of guilt and shame and rules, and I don't like any of those things. So not really the place for me. And I went on, I've had children, and all of my children have been really just massive teachers for me. So many different things, not just my spiritual journey, but so many things, not least time management, really learning to use my time and squeeze out as much as I can out of any free time. But yes, they've certainly helped me on my spiritual journey as well. So my second pregnancy that I had a number of different spiritual experiences during that pregnancy. And at the time I thought that this was a new phase in my life that I was coming into. I was wrong, it was just that I was pregnant with her. It was all coming from her. So yeah, some of the experiences that I had, and I know some of these things would be the things that people have anyway, but they were different for me. So just knowing that I was pregnant, despite a negative test, and then knowing that she was a girl a few days later. Hello, you're right. And then I realised that I could just sort of tune in and see her, or see these lights that I knew was her. And then over time that sort of took more form and became all sort of baby looking. And I didn't know at the time if I was just imagining it or what it was, but it didn't feel like I was imagining it. It did feel like I was looking at something that wasn't me. And I also had an experience when I was pregnant. I had to have an operation, and they didn't want to give me a general anaesthetic because of being pregnant. So there's me of the natural birth having gas and air and an epidural. But during that operation, I sort of tuned out, and I was worried about the baby because obviously everything passes the baby and the stress and everything. So I was worried about her. And I sort of tuned out and had this sort of image of us, being on the beach and with her younger brother and things. And again, it didn't really feel like I was imagining it, and now what I sort of learned about time and how it's probably more flexible than we're conventionally taught, it did just feel like just sort of, you know, something that was real. And yeah, so a few years later, I actually had the experience, and it was exactly as it was, down to even really strange details like my husband not being there because I'd known he wasn't there when I'd imagined it, which obviously wasn't very reassuring for our relationship when I told my husband that, but bizarrely he had to work that day, so he wasn't there with us on the beach, which normally he would have been. Oh yeah, and I should have said, when she was born, she looked exactly how I'd imagined her, like exactly, down to the fact that she even had dark hair. Because when I was imagining, visualised her being born, she always had this dark hair, and I sort of thought, that's strange, you know, her brother's very blonde, me and my husband's very blonde, surely she'll have blonde hair. And then out she came with all this lovely dark hair, as if just to reassure me that that was who I'd been seeing. And she looked exactly as she was. I remember a couple of days after I'd given birth, I had her in a sling, all sort of tucked up in this little baby hold. And I just looked down at her, and it just took my breath away because it was just so exactly as I had been seeing her while I was pregnant. So that happened, and that really helped me to just open my mind to other things and other ideas, and to accept that there's so much that I don't know and don't understand, and start breaking down that sort of box of society. And questioning things, what is true, what do we really know, what's behind what we're told, and how much is just somebody's opinion. And it's become almost like a golden rule that whatever you look into in any great detail, you soon find is not how we think it is, and not how society packages it for us. And that's a really exciting and interesting journey, breaking all of that down, but it can also be quite scary as well, and depressing at times as you sort of take away everything that we know, and you can feel a bit sort of left out in space or in a bit of a vacuum of what is really real. So, some of the things that I found helpful along the way. So, the Seth books. I love the Seth books, and I just found out that David is really interested in Seth books, so that's exciting. So obviously everybody's different, and people have different things that appeal to them, but for me personally, I've just found it's the closest thing I've found to answering those big fundamental questions, and I will keep searching, but so far it's the closest thing I've found. And I even love the way that I found the Seth books. I was reading this book, Unassisted Childbirth by Kaplan because I sort of found this book. As you can see, it's sort of not in proper print book, it's not got a proper cover. But with my first pregnancy, I'd had my own unplanned unassisted childbirth, so I had a bit of an interest in this niche area and read this book. And she speaks a lot in there about the Seth books and how they helped her, and this sort of underlying idea that you create your own reality and there are no exceptions. And that's just a really powerful statement, and it's exciting and interesting, but it can also be quite a hard thing to swallow, to think that you're creating everything, including things that you're not necessarily happy with. But it's sort of, she sort of explains, and the books explain that it's really down to a belief system, and that if you believe something to be the case, that's the reality that you'll create. So in this book, this is about childbirth, and one of the examples she uses in there is the sort of childbirth is painful idea, which is really strongly reinforced in our society on many different levels, but it's not a universal experience through sort of time and space, but because we believe it to be the case so strongly, it is something that we create. So they've been really brilliant to read. I haven't read all of them, but I'm working my way through them. What else have I found really helpful along the way? So I've listened to a lot of the Alan Watts presentations that he's done, their sort of voice recording with a nice video on YouTube, and he's really good for talking about living joyfully and what is going on Earth, and he also is good at looking at the religious stories and what they actually symbolise, what they mean on a deeper level for our spiritual journey. He's interested in Christianity and also Eastern religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and really looking underneath the stories at what they represent symbolically. And I think that's the benefit if you can find a really good teacher to talk about things, because this is my shit analogy, but I still use it because I haven't found a better one. But religion can tend to be a bit like it's made of wood, and that religion's like it's made of metal, and that one's like it's made of plastic. But like say we're in a religion that's made of wood, and then they'll talk about how the paint's a bit different, a bit of a different colour here, and where this bit of wood meets that bit of wood, there's some little etchings, and they'll sort of go on about these details. And if you can get a really good teacher, they'll just say, it's a ladder. You know, whatever the material or the details, it's a ladder, and it's your spiritual journey, individually and as a whole. And that really seems to be the underlying message of most religions. And I've looked into a lot of them, and sort of ancient religions, and the mystery traditions, and the secret societies. And they all seem to have those same underlying messages. Obviously they have their own details, and there's a lot that they're trying to communicate, but it's a lot about understanding the importance of our spiritual side, and that we are a spiritual entity in a physical world. And one of the things that they really come down to as well is this sort of this idea of coming from the one, coming out into duality, and then here on earth trying to bring those two things into balance, bring them together, and to create powerful action in the world. So those two things, or two pillars as they are in a lot of religions, you've got sort of the physical and the spiritual, the masculine and the feminine, the light and the dark, the sun and the moon, action and reflection, and courage and true care. And bringing those two things into balance with the knowledge, and then taking them forward and producing powerful action is really a strong message lying at the bottom of sort of all the religions and traditions I've looked into. And that is the sort of holy trinity of Christianity. In Christianity, the feminine side is the Holy Spirit, because obviously you're not allowed any women in Christianity. But that's sort of the underlying message, and that's really important knowledge for everybody to know. And you know, the people who currently run the world, they do know this stuff, because it's at the bottom of all the sort of secret societies, which they're all a member of some sort of secret society or group, and that is the core message. It's getting your true care into balance with your courage, and those whole columns, and then having powerful action in the world. And they also understand about more powerful times of the year, and more powerful places where energy is stronger, and how to use that energy. But obviously we can all use this information to create the world that we want to create, because that is what it's really about, is creating what you want. This knowledge isn't sort of generally widely known, and it's often hidden, and there's different reasons for that. So some of the reasons that this knowledge has been hidden in the past is that it's felt that you should go on a journey, and a sort of spiritual growth journey, before you learn this, so that you know how to use it responsibly. It's also been hidden at different times because at times there have been genuine efforts to destroy the information. And it's also hidden by the people who are currently using it very strongly to direct the world. Because if your sort of message to the world is that we live in this sort of system, and you need a tiny little group of people at the top who have all the power and make all the decisions and control everything, and everybody else really just needs to basically do as they're told, it's not going to do you very well to let people know about their personal sovereignty and their personal power and potential and strength to create whatever world they live in. And I do believe that we can create any world we want to live in, and that is the purpose of being here. So, some of the other things that I have found really helpful along the way. Talking about good teachers, so there's a YouTube channel called Kabbalah Info, and there's a series of videos on there with Dr. Michael Laitman. They're very, very good. They're going through sort of Old Testament stories, and I think they're really useful, because they're stories that we know so well, that are so ingrained within us, like Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah's Ark, but he's sort of talking about them and the deeper spiritual meanings behind them. So for example, Noah, I'm going to say this in a crap way, he says it really well, but you know, Noah's Ark is supposed to be about taking yourself away, in seclusion, away from human desires and human needs, and just being with your sort of animal self and all your, you know, and working through things spiritually. He talks about it in a much better way. It's really, really good and inspiring to listen to. What other things? Yes, so talking about sort of what's going on and trying to take control of stuff. There's a good website called What on Earth is Happening. That's Mark Passio who does that. I don't think he's on YouTube, but he's on sort of other platforms like Odyssey. And he's got his own website, and there's tons of podcasts and great video lectures on there. And he talks a lot about natural law and how things are actually happening in the world and how things should be happening, what we can be working towards. He can come across as a bit aggressive because he's very passionate about things. Personally, I don't have a problem with that. I think, you know, our aggression and passion, as long as it's channeled effectively, you know, it can be a tool to try and actually push things forward. But he's really, really good. He's got a lot of knowledge. Yeah, I don't mind that. Sometimes when I look into an area and people are very gentle and softly spoken and it's all lovely, I think, oh God, don't think I'm going to fit in there. So yeah, so everybody's different and he's really, really good. I've absolutely flown through this. So some of the other things I've found useful are looked into tarot, and that's really interesting. And again, the tarot is quite strongly linked to Kabbalah and the sort of messages of that, of going through this long spiritual journey through different lives and identifying with different people. And the whole thing of tarot is that, you know, you're supposed to go through every card in your experience. And that's been really helpful to learn about. I would say as well that there's nothing that I would say, that's it, that's the thing you have to follow and be interested in. Everything is a tool to be learned from, you know, including the set books, which are my favourite so far. Everything's a tool to just sort of learn about and open our mind and help us along. And yeah, tarot can be really useful for that. It's got a lot of layers as well, so yeah, that's good. What else? This book I found really good, The Continuum Concept by Jean Liedloff. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. But that's really good for just looking, I mean, it says it's about babies, but I think it's really about our whole society and just stepping back and looking at it inside its box and seeing it for what it really is and the very bizarre and strange things that we do, which are supposed to be normal. That's really good. I'm also looking at anarchism at the moment. That's my sort of a new area of interest because that's a no rules sort of thing. So that's interesting. I mean, my ideas of anarchism sort of either came from, you know, Rick from the young ones or pissing up a wall against a big A sign. So it's really interesting to look at it at that deeper level because that's what society's taught me about it. That's the veneer that I know about it. But now looking at it at a deeper level and how it can be actually taken seriously and used seriously, that's really good. I'm also quite into near-death experiences. They're really interesting. Listening to what people talk about, really just amazing and mind-expanding. Oh, do you know what I didn't say about the Seth books? I didn't say what they actually are. So, the Seth books. So Seth is a spiritual entity being channeled by this woman, Jane Roberts, and her husband, Robert F. Butts, is taking the notes, and then they turn all that into a book. I know some people might be a bit sceptical of that, like, oh, it's a spiritual entity being channeled, could be faked or whatever. And Jane and Rob themselves at the beginning were a bit like, you know, is this, are we really channeling a spirit, or is it just coming out of Jane's subconscious? But they looked at the material, and the material itself is just really, really good. It's really, really high quality material. And I think if people can come at it with that open mind, even if they don't know exactly where it comes from, just look at the actual material. Yeah, it's really, really good. Right, is there anything else I wanted to talk about? I've like absolutely flown through this like I knew I would. Has anybody got any questions?
Would you be able to send us an email out just so that you've just spoken about, just so we can
Yeah, I can do, and I've also got a bit of paper there and some pens. If people can write down, I've written down a few of the things that I've spoken about, but yeah, I can do that. And yeah, anybody else that can add to that, anything that they think is really, really useful and yeah, really good, because sometimes it can be like you've got to go through a lot of crap to get to the good stuff when